400 feet beneath the surface of the ocean, these divers are pushing the limits of human survival. One moment of panic could be lethal.
Any idiot can descend down to a 100-meter wreck, but it's getting yourself back up, back onto the surface safely, that takes the skill.
In this alien environment, these divers search for one of the world's deeper diveable wrecks, using sophisticated technology which rivals that of space exploration.
It's the Star Trek syndrome, to go where no one's gone before.
But there are others who reject the equipment required to breathe underwater and instead dive just as deep on a single breath.
I can feel my heart rate slow down. I can feel the blood move away from my extremities. I can feel a sensation of cold go across my face.
A complex and hazardous expedition in the Pacific Ocean will combine these diving extremes in a demonstration of how mind power can enable divers to push their bodies way beyond the limit. The remarkable ski field near Queenstown, New Zealand.
Well, that was easy.
These two men are beginning a journey which over 4 weeks will see them attempt an extremely dangerous dive. At nearly 6,000 feet, Lake Alta is one of the highest lakes in the Southern Alps of New Zealand. During winter, it's frozen over. That's exactly what these elite divers require. Extremes.
Just look at this, man. We've got mountains all around us. We've got snowboarders and skiers plummeting down to the lake's edge, and we're actually going to be going under that lake.
Pete Mesley grew up in Zimbabwe and has lived in New Zealand for 7 years. He's a full-time diving instructor.
2,300 metres above sea level. and salt water, nowhere to be seen. For a long time, I wanted to be a marine biologist. As soon as I heard that I needed to have a lot of brains, I thought, oh, that's me. I'm history. I'm one of these people who are absolute fanatic about diving, and everything that I do around my circle of life evolves around diving.
Australian Dave Apperly, an expert technical diver and explorer of claustrophobic underwater caves.
First thing that springs to mind is people can't talk yet. The serenity, the peacefulness of it, and just the sound of you breathing in and then your bubbles going off.
Bloody ice, it's worse than sand. Gets in the way.
This is stage 1 of the build-up to a most dangerous dive. Far from salt water, Pete Mesley and Dave Apperly are testing themselves and their equipment in an environment where there's little margin for error.
But we do have to find out about these breathers and see how well they're going to go in real cold water.
In temperatures almost as cold as the Antarctic, the plan is to test in the most extreme conditions one essential piece of technology: the closed-circuit rebreather. The destination Pete and Dave are ultimately aiming for means they'll have to stay submerged for almost 5 hours. It's the closed-circuit rebreather which will enable them to survive at a depth well beyond what was once thought the human limit. Diving under the ice can be just as hazardous as deep diving. The equipment can freeze and malfunction. In freezing temperatures, there's just one exit through the ice to the surface. But these divers relish the claustrophobic conditions. The rebreather has performed perfectly under the ice. The first stage of the expedition has been completed.
That was a totally different, amazing feeling. I can't feel my toes.
I'll tell you put a cave at the bottom of that, and that is the ultimate.
Pete and Dave's appetite for adventure has been whetted on this ice dive. But waiting for them at the other end of New Zealand is the elusive dream of Southern Hemisphere deep divers. The Niagara, once known as the Titanic of the Pacific. The Niagara was a 525-foot luxury ocean-going liner. In 1940, she struck a German mine and sank off the northern tip of New Zealand. Unlike the Titanic, there were no casualties. There was a salvage operation in 1941 to reclaim gold bars she carried. Since then, the Niagara has lain in 400 feet of water, waiting. Five years ago, Dave and Pete came across the Niagara story while on a diving trip in New Zealand.
We saw this, a couple of pictures on the wall of the Niagara, and then the story started to come out, and the bug started to expand from there.
Especially when I heard it was a 543 odd foot luxury passenger liner sitting in 100 metres of water. It's like, we've got to go and have a look. CCR, now if closed circuit rebreather fails, you see the Robert Ballard's footage of the Titanic on the bottom, yeah, and you think, wow, I could go and dive something like this. It's got to be spectacular.
In 1999, Dave and a Welshman, Tim Cashman, made diving history when they were the first to swim down the 400 feet to the wreck of the Niagara.
If not the best, one of the world's best technical dives. But we still had no evidence. So I was really keen to get some sort of video footage, to show people just how good this wreck is.
Since then, all three divers have dreamt of returning to be the first free-swimming divers ever to film the wreck. Tim will arrive in New Zealand on the next stage of the expedition. The divers travel north to the small coastal town of Tutukaka. This will be expedition headquarters for the next few weeks. To dive the Niagara is a mammoth undertaking. The planning, logistics, teamwork and safety coordination is equivalent to that of a major Himalayan expedition. Lying at 400 feet, the Niagara is near the limits of technical diving. There are two crucial elements which will allow the divers to penetrate these depths. A specialized blend of gases known as trimix and the closed-circuit rebreather. To dive the Niagara on a traditional scuba system would be near impossible. Open-circuit scuba consists of a tank containing the same air we breathe at the surface. It's wasteful, as each time a diver takes a breath through the regulator, they exhale into the water, wasting oxygen in the form of bubbles. The deeper they descend, the more oxygen they lose. On scuba, time would be severely restricted. A rebreather, however, recycles the air. Compared to scuba, the luxury of time seems endless.
One of the major things that leads to panic is time pressure. You only have a certain amount of time to solve a problem. So with a rebreather, because you've basically got endless amount of gas supply, you can sit there and just say, right, well, I've got all the time in the world to sort this problem out.
A closed-circuit rebreather starts with a breathing loop equipped with a mouthpiece. It connects to the tank which supplies the special gas mixture. As the diver exhales, each breath travels out through a tube into a chamber where the poisonous carbon dioxide is removed. The remaining gas is fed back to the diver to be used again. It's about 200 times more efficient than scuba at the Niagara depth. But it's not just air wastage that prohibits the use of scuba on deep dives. On scuba, divers experience a phenomenon called nitrogen narcosis, which can occur from just 100 feet.
Stand by to leave surface.
Devonport Naval Base Recompression Chamber, just down the road from Expedition Headquarters. Pete and Dave agree to a simulated dive to 162 feet, or 50 metres. Inside the chamber, breathing normal air as they would on scuba, they'll experience the dreaded nitrogen narcosis.
Arrive first stop, all well?
As the simulated depth increases, so too does the pressure on the gases in their bodies. Nitrogen begins to dissolve quickly into their bloodstreams. The nitrogen builds up and begins to act as a potent narcotic, affecting brain function and coordination. The effect at this depth is equivalent to drinking 2 vodka martinis in quick succession.
How you feeling, you alright? Good?
Totally off me nut.
If Jesus is the answer, then what is the question?
42! Come on, keep going, give me another question.
This is why open circuit scuba is not an option for the Niagara expedition.
Anybody who goes to 50 metres is greatly affected. Yeah. Okay, what is the square root of 175?
Tell someone who cares.
The first practice dive, and the team journeys out to the Poor Knights Islands, considered one of the best dive sites in the world.
This is the Niagara taxi. Right, yeah.
Here they will begin the first of many build-up dives to fine-tune equipment and coordinate their teamwork before attempting the Niagara.
The gearing up stage is always quite a large energy sapping task because of the fact that all this equipment that we're putting on is extremely heavy. The time it takes to put the gear on and to get into the water is critical.
Each rig weighs up to 50 kilograms or 110 pounds.
The first time of the day it was really good to get in the water, dust off all the cobwebs.
These build-up dives are essential to detect seemingly trivial malfunctions. At 400 feet, these could escalate into catastrophes.
There's one of those leaks trickling up past me now. I have to work out where that's coming from.
A button used to add oxygen into Dave's rebreather system is being accidentally triggered, causing a large air leak.
Everybody goes down there, they must be 100% self-sufficient.
We're back. Ready?
They need at least another 5 dives to iron out equipment problems. The surface support team also come under scrutiny.
Oh mate, you're going to have to sack him.
Is it?
30 seconds till I heard the boat. 45 seconds till they picked up the buoy. And 2 bloody minutes until I got gas. Shocking.
There's a lot more work to do before the team is ready. The next day, the 3rd member of the dive team turns up.
Hello, hello.
It's the Welshman. The Welsh ukulele, is it?
Tim Cashman has just flown 30 hours from the United Kingdom. He's a highly experienced deep diver, but has a lot of catching up to do.
You take away all the anxieties that you have, so you know when you go in the water that your equipment's right because you've rebuilt it.
With the team complete, the build-up dives become full dress rehearsals.
Complacency is always the thing that seems to get people. Like, you just get too familiar with the type of diving you're doing.
The most dangerous part of any dive is the ascent. While they're on the bottom, nitrogen builds up in their blood. On the way up, they have to decompress at various depths. This allows time for the lethal nitrogen to disperse out of the blood. If Tim made the slightest error of judgment on his decompression, it could have devastating effects. Around his body, especially the joints and spine, the sudden change in pressure would force nitrogen out of his blood and tissues, forming bubbles. His immune system would respond by sending blood platelets to the bubbles, which then obstruct blood flow. Tim would be a victim of decompression sickness, or the bends. He could be paralyzed, or even die. On the Niagara dive, the possibility of the bends will be a major threat to each diver. Each team member is fully aware of the dangers that lie ahead. They are physically ready for the challenge. Now they begin the psychological build-up. Back at expedition headquarters, there's a new arrival. She needs the skills of the dive team for her own challenge. Tanya Streeter dives nearly as deep as the Niagara team, but has no need for rebreathers, mixed gas, or even scuba. She does it on a single breath. Tanya Streeter is a free diver. She's one of the few people in the world who can dive to a depth of over 300 feet, holding her breath.
If I can see something that is a massive challenge to me, something that I either believe is completely impossible or I know is going to be exceptionally difficult, if I can embrace that, and that's become my quest to see how strong I am.
Tanya has travelled to New Zealand to attempt for the first time ever here a free dive in a category known as No Limits. This involves her descending on a weighted sled to a depth of 325 feet, or 100 metres. The attempt is only possible because the deep diving team has agreed to act as her support during their build-up to the Niagara. They are the only divers qualified and equipped to do this in New Zealand.
I think it'll be something I'd remember for a fair while, sort of sitting at 100 metres and watching this person just come down and sort of give you a wave and then take off.
A lot of the time people may think that we're just as mad doing what we do, but we're the least mad. We're the sanest of the lot. And she's mad. She's absolutely mad.
Born in the Grand Cayman Islands in the Caribbean, Tanya has only ever dived in warm water. Here in New Zealand, in the temperate waters of the Poor Knights Islands, it's a lot colder than anything she's ever experienced. The cold water could be her undoing.
If that happens, obviously you're not.
None of the divers have ever seen a free dive before. Tanya has to brief them on their roles.
As I'm coming down, you guys should be looking up anyway, and you should watch me, and you shouldn't take your eyes off looking down until you've seen me go back up again.
One diver will be stationed midway down the sled line. His job is to signal depth to Tanya by tapping as she descends.
The person at 50 metres on the way down is also going to tap, but they're only going to tap 3 times as I go through 50 metres again. Tap, tap, tap as I go past, and then stop.
But I listen for the taps. I can hear the taps. So in my own mind, it's like 60.
Tanya's husband, Paul, is also a free diver and her surface safety support. He dives down to 65 feet to accompany Tanya on the final part of her ascent back to the surface.
if something goes wrong and you're doing all this excessive tapping, I know that something's wrong.
At the bottom of the line, 2 divers will ensure her sled release goes smoothly and her journey to the surface begins safely.
I shall probably place one hand on the lift bag up here. I'll release the catch and I'll open the valve and then I'll go. We're a new team here, all of us, and that provides just a whole different can of worms. And no doubt Pete and Dave and Tim already are taking care of things that just don't cross my mind. Any other questions that you guys have?
Tanya's sled rope has to be prepared for her dives. It's immersed in water, stretched, and accurately measured. The overall length of the rope is 400 feet, or 120 meters, the same depth the Niagara lies at.
There's a massive mental challenge to it because of the depth that's involved.
The key to freediving is breath holding.
It doesn't seem to be anything other than slightly slow, deep breathing, but there's different things that I'm doing with my diaphragm.
Tanya has trained herself to swallow air into lungs which are already full of air. Like the Niagara divers, Tanya needs to begin her challenge with a series of build-up dives. Her first dive is to 100 feet, or 30 meters, in a sheltered inlet at the Poor Knights Islands. As this is relatively shallow, Pete, Dave and Tim will observe from the surface.
It's been over 3 years since I did my record, and that was the last time I did any sled diving.
Freediving has different categories. In a no-limits dive, the weighted sled on a line pulls the diver down, and an inflating balloon assists the ascent. This is the deepest form of freediving.
Rope on the top. Yep. Out.
The first job is to position the 160-pound ballast which holds the sled line vertical.
The cold, I would say, is personally my greatest fear. Oh, zips in my suit. Got myself into a terrible state. I would try and sit and imagine what is it going to be like to be in 15 or 16 degrees.
Tanya and Paul do a visual check to ensure the sled line is correctly placed. When humans hold their breath and descend in cold water, their bodies respond with what's called the dive reflex. It's the same response seals have when they dive deep looking for food.
I start doing that breathing and I can feel my heart rate slow down.
Before descending, Tanya sucks the full capacity of air into her lungs. This is all she has to keep her alive till she surfaces.
I can feel different sensations. I can feel the blood shift, the blood move away from my extremities. I can feel a sensation of cold go across my face, and sometimes also a taste of metal in my mouth.
As she descends, the dive reflex kicks in. Her heart rate lowers to around 12 to 15 beats per minute. Blood flow shifts from the extremities to the central organs. Her lungs are crushed until they cannot compress any further. Blood and other fluids are forced into her chest cavity where the lungs would normally sit. Her brain, heart and lungs receive priority for the body's precious remaining oxygen. There's considerable pain as the eardrums feel about to burst.
I've encountered pain in my eardrums, especially with sled diving, because of the extremity of the depth.
free diving, to me, the uninitiated, appears pretty reckless. It stuns me that somebody can get to these depths without any equipment whatsoever, other than a wetsuit.
As Tanya nears the surface, she lets go of the sled and swims up the final 60 feet. There's a huge pressure shift in that final distance. Her lungs suddenly expand back to normal size and suck oxygen from her blood. The danger is that she could black out. She has to kick slowly to the surface to prevent this happening. Tanya successfully completes her first no-limit sled dive in over 3 years. She has only 5 more days to achieve her goal of 325 feet or 100 meters.
O2 goes in first, of course.
The next day, it's time to mix the gases the dive team will use on both Tanya's dive and the Niagara.
That's a Greek.
Precise percentages of oxygen, helium and nitrogen must be blended together to produce trimix.
6.8, 6.97, 6.9. What are you after? 7.
This is a tense procedure. Misjudging the gas mixture by as little as 1% would be enough to cause it to become poisonous. If there was a mistake with too much oxygen being added, the result underwater could cause a lethal condition known as central nervous system toxicity. The diver could suffer an epileptic-like seizure. They'll be in the water for up to 5 hours decompressing and will require different mixes at different depths. On each deep dive, they'll consume up to 5 tanks per diver. It's time for Tanya's first build-up dive, using the Trimix divers for the first time. She's attempting 85 meters, or 276 feet.
If we're doing a dive and I'm at anything at 80 meters or above, I'm not going to need your assistance unless I am blacked out. It's really unlikely that anything's going to happen.
On this dive, Tanya will be underwater for approximately 1.5 minutes. The Trimix divers will be down for over 2 hours. It only takes 4 minutes for Pete, Dave and Tim to get to the deepest position. But on the way up, they have to stop at 6 different depths to decompress. This is to dissipate the dangerous nitrogen levels which have built up in their blood. Because Tanya is deep for such a short period of time on just one lungful of air, nitrogen doesn't have a chance to build up in her blood, so she doesn't have to decompress. The two methods of diving deep couldn't be more starkly contrasted.
I know what it's like to be at 100 metres and I can't comprehend being there without any equipment.
Out at the dive site, the swell is coming up. The dive boat has to be positioned in the lee of one of the Poor Knights Islands. The Trimix divers kit up and wait. Tanya is still terrified of the cold water. Its effect on her physiology at this depth is still an unknown factor. She warms up with a hot water hose.
5 minutes!
In the last minutes before the dive, the sled boat is drifting dangerously close to the island. The chase boat tows it away.
You need to get whatever boat that is getting the fumes.
Diesel fumes are irritating her lungs. As Tanya descends, what she doesn't know is that the sled line has drifted onto a shallower rock ledge. She realizes something is amiss and stops the sled prematurely at 230 feet. Distracted, she finds she can't release the lift bag to take her to the surface. For 17 seconds, she frantically wrestles with the mechanism. One of the safety divers swims up from below to assist. But she's made her decision. She has to kick 230 feet to the surface after already being submerged for over a minute.
It's really unlikely that anything's going to happen.
As she surfaces, the unthinkable happens. She experiences shallow water blackout. Her lungs have expanded too quickly, sucking all the oxygen from her blood. She has pushed herself beyond her limit.
I did indeed.
Just watch out because it might come hurtling up now. Fighting with the lift bag to get it undone. I couldn't get the release to work. I was pulling and pulling and pulling and push the sled up and pulling and pulling.
What I didn't consider wholly is the time I spent at the bottom, the effort that I put into trying to release that clip, which was quite considerable, and that was a mistake. It's given me a massive mental barrier. I've never had a blackout in that situation. I think I realised my own vulnerability very much. I overlooked to tell the divers that that was a situation where you call the dive. That was entirely my fault. I think I pulled with my left hand. I pulled left because I don't think I can pull and do the thing with the same hand. We've all learned from it, but it was potentially an extremely dangerous situation, and not just for me. I'm just going to grab that and
It's gonna be
gently
hanging
yank
right in
it.
front of our
Look at
eyes
that.
anyway.
That's amazing. It's
Don't get it
really
easy.
don't need to yank it as hard as I was then.
Tanya and Paul review their preparations.
Wow, that is just positively in the right place, isn't it? It doesn't get any better than that.
During Tanya's dives, the image of the Niagara has never been far from Pete, Dave and Tim's minds. Now, it's their turn. The day begins with a problem. Pete discovers a hole in the exhalation bag of his rebreather.
But my redundant bag's got a tear in it. Had a bit of a prick of a morning, but we've sorted it out. And a lot of people are willing to drop everything and help out, which is just amazing.
We're back in.
With Tanya's blackout still on their minds, the divers are all on edge.
You've got a sort of healthy dose of apprehension, just thinking over and over in your mind what you're going to do, how you're going to do it. Have you got all the little things in the right place? It's a mental rehearsal time, basically.
Russell Radio, Real Passion.
Real Passion here, good morning.
Top of the morning, dear Richie.
I'd certainly believe a lot of it is psychological, and if you visualise the whole dive from start to finish as going well, 99% of the time the problems don't arise.
Revisiting the Niagara is a moment Dave and Tim have both dreamt about since their first experience. For Pete, who missed out last time, this is a defining moment. The divers will be underwater for nearly 5 hours. They have to take water bottles to keep from dehydrating. They also wear diapers inside their dry suits, as their bladders won't last. The descent to the wreck will take 10 minutes, and they'll spend 25 minutes exploring the Niagara. The rest of the time will be spent decompressing. The camera equipment is especially modified to withstand the extreme pressure. The team will also be backed up by a remote camera operated from the dive boat.
The current is pulling me away from that rope.
Light will always be the limiting factor. To floodlight the huge wreck would take a budget of titanic proportions. The shot line is placed over the wreck and the team is towed by the chase boat to their point of departure.
I just can't wait. Get down that line.
At 10 minutes past 11, the team descends.
It's the Star Trek syndrome, to go where no one's gone before. You just don't know what's there until you go there.
It's an unforgiving world down there. If you can't get yourself out of trouble, you can't expect somebody else to get you out of trouble.
In just over 8 minutes, it's pitch black down here. The divers' lights illuminate the first glimpse of the ship they've been preparing to see for so long.
Just gets darker and darker. Then you see the wreck laid out below you. It's a magnificent ship.
She lies on her port side, her decks near vertical. There's a gaping hole in her hull where explosives blasted her open back in 1941 to retrieve the gold bars. The Trimix divers have placed their shot line so they can explore the area around the bridge at the front of the ship. At nearly 400 feet, the helium in the gas mixture helps keep their minds clear. It's reducing the narcotic effect of the nitrogen which is building up in their bloodstream. Helium does have a side effect.
And I see Dave and Tim just talking to each other madly away there, and it was like the chipmunks revisited.
The divers have spent so much time studying plans, they know exactly where they are on the wreck.
The biggest thing is getting inside the wreck and getting into the third-class cabins up the bow there. You recognise stuff, but I suppose that fan, that's something a bit more personal. One fan there for one person, and yeah, you're sort of swimming through someone's bedroom.
There are still gold bars on the Niagara. Not all of them were recovered in 1941. The location of the remainder is not known, but this is a filming expedition, not a salvage operation. The only treasure found today is a teacup. It will later be catalogued and archived.
Try and get in there somewhere and position ourselves.
On the surface, the remote camera follows every step of the exploration. He could easily lose them on such a huge wreck. Time on the wreck has run out. If they stayed on the bottom one more minute, the penalty would be another 13 minutes on their already 5-hour decompression. the divers take one last look at the Niagara.
At the end of the dive, I think the biggest thing is extreme joy.
Now begins the most dangerous part of the dive, the ascent.
Any idiot can descend down to a 100-meter wreck, but it's getting yourself back onto the surface safely that takes the skill.
At the surface, the safety team is anxious. The divers reach the first decompression stop at 276 feet. They've been underwater for 36 minutes. They won't surface for another 4 hours. They send the first signal to the surface.
Got the slate? All okay. 3 divers okay.
The divers will stop 20 more times at specific depth points on their ascent. They begin to alter the balance of the gas mixture to compensate for the changes in pressure.
What you really notice is the cold. Hanging in mid-water for a long period of time, you do get dehydrated.
The team are now at their final decompression position, just 10 feet below the surface. They'll stay here for 1 hour and 47 minutes. Support divers snorkel down to keep them company.
By the end of 4.5 hours and you're finally coming up to the surface, you're sort of over it. You just want to get out and warm up.
Dave, Pete and Tim have made diving history. They are the first divers to film the majestic Titanic of the Pacific.
So what do you think of the Niagara?
Bloody marvellous!
They've tested themselves physically and mentally in one of the most unforgiving environments on the planet.
It's one of the best dives I've ever had. That was fantastic.
Been there, dived that? Right.
I couldn't believe it. I mean, the viz was brilliant, wasn't it?
It was a lot better
Much
than the other
better.
day.
You could see the whole wreck.
The Niagara expedition has been a success. With limited time before the team leaves the country, there's one last chance for Tanya. She focuses with static apnea exercises in a pool. This is simply breath holding without moving. She can hold her breath like this for nearly 6 minutes.
I'm maybe beating myself up a little bit about the incident on Monday because I do feel so responsible. It's not just that it's me doing the dive, because it's very much a team sport. Perhaps I am capable of pushing myself too far.
The Trimix team can't dive the day after the Niagara. They have to have a day off to guard against nitrogen buildup in their blood. Today is the last day of the expedition. With the setbacks suffered so far, Tanya sets her limit at 90 meters or 295 feet. But the weather turns against them. A huge squall blows up.
I don't feel there's any pressure on there to do it.
I'm sorry, guys. I don't want to put the divers in the water for nothing, and I don't think I'm going to get down to the bottom.
It's the duration that safety divers have to spend in the water that limits the dive. If the weather deteriorates further, they still have to finish their long decompression. They would be in danger from drifting in strong currents in the dark. The conditions improve slightly, but the dive window is closing. It's now or never.
In facing challenges, it's empowering to overcome each one. It's only then that I learn really what I'm capable of.
This sequence has been edited to the exact duration of Tanya's dive. Tanya Streeter has dived to 91 metres or 296 feet and spent 1 minute and 40 seconds underwater. With the assistance of 3 of the world's most skillful technical divers, she has created a New Zealand freediving benchmark.
They say that scuba divers descend to look around themselves and freedivers descend to look within themselves.
The reward is just going back and looking back on the boat and seeing everybody go, oh, thank goodness, yeah. Oh, it's great. It's great. It's over.
2 hours and 13 minutes later.
How'd you do?
91.
Very nice. Well done. Well done. Congratulations, that was well done. It's amazing to see.
Not cold yet.